lesson comes from Genesis 45, verses 1 through 15. This talks about when Joseph reveals his identity. Joseph could no longer control himself in front of all of his attendants, so he declared, "Everyone, leave now." So no one stayed with him when he revealed his identity to his brothers. He wept so loudly that the Egyptians and Pharaoh's households heard him. Joseph said to his brothers, "I'm Joseph. Is my father really still alive?" His brothers couldn't respond because they were terrified before him. Joseph said to his brothers, "Come closer to me," and they moved closer. He said, "I'm your brother Joseph, the one you sold to Egypt. Now don't be upset and don't be angry with yourselves that you sold me here. Actually, God sent me before you to save lives. We've already had 2 years of famine in the land, and there are 5 years left without planting or harvesting. God sent me before you to make sure you'd survive and to rescue your lives in this amazing way. You didn't send me here. It was God who made me a father to Pharaoh, master of his entire household, and ruler of the whole land of Egypt. Hurry, go back to your father. Tell him this is what your son Joseph says. God made me master of all Egypt. Come down to me. Don't delay. You may live in the land of Goshen, so you will be near me, your children, your grandchildren, your flocks, your herds, and everyone with you. I will support you there, so you, your household, and everyone with you won't starve, since the famine will still last 5 years. You and my brother Benjamin have seen with your own eyes that I'm speaking to you. Tell my father about my power in Egypt and about everything you've seen. Hurry and bring my father down here." He threw his arms around his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept on his shoulder. He kissed all of his brothers and wept, embracing them. After that, his brothers were finally able to talk to him. The word of God for the people of God.
Got a little different sermon today. It's a video. I figured out now it's about 3 years ago I came across the same passage because it's in the lectionary. And every 3 years we come back to the same 3 passages. And this passage we looked at I looked at the previous church, and I made this video about it. Now, the video is about a dysfunctional family. That's kind of the hook I had at the time. But this is also about freedom out of control. And we're going to talk about what that means in just a minute. So let's go ahead and roll the video.
I found this picture with an article that told of a little-known law in Kansas. When 2 trains meet each other at a cross-track, they are required to both come to a complete stop, then wait for the other train to proceed. So it's, "After you." "No, I can't." "After you." "I can't." "After you." "I can't." "After you." Dysfunction junction. When we come to cross-tracks in our lives, in our families, in our community, and the world, it can be just as dysfunctional. This book of Genesis, is about a dysfunctional family. The patriarchs may be the first ancestors of our faith, but they are not particularly holy people. Faithful, yes. Perfect, not so much. Abraham is the great father, but he is also a mercenary warrior, a con man, and a child abuser. His first son is banished from the nomadic band. His second son, Isaac, the one offered up as a sacrifice, though Abe doesn't go through with it, is emotionally scarred for life. Isaac's family is torn in half by parental favoritism and chicanery. Jacob steals his older brother's birthright, tricks his father Isaac into giving him his older brother's blessing, then runs away to Uncle Laban's place, only to be on the receiving end of a lot of dirty tricks. Jacob may have wrestled with God and received the blessing of a new name, Israel, but he continues to limp through life, producing a dozen bickering sons and 1 daughter. The second youngest son, Joseph, is Jacob's favorite, and acts like it. His older brothers decide to kill him. Fortunately, they change their minds and sell him into slavery instead, bloody his famous coat of many colors, and tell Dad that dear Joseph was eaten by a lion. Over the next 20 years or so, these brothers continue to be a completely dysfunctional family, and Joseph is a slave in Egypt. The 1 daughter of Jacob, Dinah, is abducted and raped by Prince Shechem. His father, King Hamor, comes to Jacob to ask for Dinah as a wife for his son. The deal is struck that marriage between the Canaanites and the family of Israel can happen only if all the men of the town of Shechem are circumcised, which they do, and on the third day after the mass circumcision, Levi and Simeon, brothers of Dinah, raid the city and kill all the men and take all the women and children and valuables as plunder. And Joseph is a slave in Egypt. Then there's the case of Tamar, the wife of Judah's son Ur dies, and according to Levirate marriage customs, younger brother Onan is supposed to give Tamar a child to continue Ur's family. Onan doesn't, and Tamar is told by Judah that she will have to wait for the third son, Selah, to reach maturity. But when Selah reaches maturity, Judah evidently forgets about having told Tamar to hold on, so she takes matters into her own hand. Judah's wife has died, and after the period of mourning, he goes to Timnah for the shearing of the sheep. During the night he employs a prostitute, promising her a goat in payment, but giving her his staff and seal as a security deposit. A few months later, Tamar starts to show her pregnancy, and everyone is giving her a hard time for it. Judah judges she must die. But at her trial she says, "The father of my baby gave me these," and presents the staff and seal. That was embarrassing for Judah. And Joseph is a slave in Egypt. You might have noticed something going on here in this dysfunctional family. There is a sense that everyone must somehow get even with those who upset the apple cart. During all this time, some 22 years, Joseph rose to head household servant, then plummeted into jail. But he used his gift of interpreting dreams to get himself before the Pharaoh. He does a splendid job of making sense out of the disturbing nightmares of Pharaoh. The Pharaoh's dreams, you probably remember, were about 7 years of plenty and 7 years of drought. Pharaoh decided it was more prudent to act upon warnings of climate change than to pooh-pooh the messenger, and made Joseph second in command over all of Egypt to handle the storage and later distribution of grain. The climate change was wider than just Egypt, and affected the marginal lands where Jacob and his dysfunctional family were grazing their animals. So the older sons came down to Egypt, hoping to buy some grain to see them through the hard times. The person to talk to was Joseph, but they didn't recognize him, what with the Egyptian hat and the Egyptian clothes and the Egyptian beard, not to mention the unpronounceable Egyptian name. Now, based on the norm for people of Jacob's family and all that has happened to Joseph, all set in motion by the murderous desires of his own brothers, you might think it was time for Joseph to get even. And he does. He jerks his brothers around some by putting gold in their sacks of grain, which is found by the soldiers at the border. They are accused of stealing from the second most powerful man in Egypt. But Joseph just couldn't take it any more. You might say he lost control. He was in a position to give his idiotic brothers exactly what they deserved. I mean, they wouldn't have hesitated to do it to him, right? And our passage today begins with, "Then Joseph could no longer control himself." Uh-oh, someone's going to get it now. But in fact, what Joseph could no longer control was not his passion, but rather his compassion. There is a difference, you know. The other sons of Jacob knew passion. Makes your blood boil, doesn't it? Want to get even, don't you? And when passion overcomes control, well, it's not pretty. It might be right. It's always right from the perspective of the passionate one, but it winds up being hurtful and damaging and a good reason for other passionate people to avenge the hurt and damage. That is still what is going on in the Middle East. It's an eye for an eye until everyone is blind. There is no end. There is no hope. Only passion losing control. But something happened to Joseph during his years of slavery. Perhaps he has discovered how small and helpless he really is in a very tough world. Lashing out the demons out there won't stop the problem. The problem, the real dysfunctionality, is right here in the head and here in the heart. It is the ego which can never forget the slightest slight of the past, and is always trembling with fear of everything that might happen in the future, yet cannot really know this very moment, this now, this instant. The ego cannot be present in the present. The ego is important. We need it to navigate the world around us, but it becomes confused and dysfunctional. In the Amazon rainforest was a tribe that had poor anger management skills. If someone hurt you, belittled you, embarrassed you, you just grabbed your spear and ran him or her through. You may have seen the story of this tribe's encounter with Christian missionaries in the movie The End of the Spear.
We have one chance to reach these people.
No one's ever made contact with these people and lived to talk about it.
Daddy loves you.
Gentlemen, we got company.
So far, we found 4 of them.
Are we going to run?
No.
What? What?
自己带他吧。
我们这可哭啊！我是啥？抱歉。
My father lost his life at the end of the spear. And it was at the end of the spear that Minkayani and I found ours. It's true that my dad and his 4 friends were not given the privilege of watching their children and grandchildren grow up. But Minkayani is a grandfather. It's the first time in Wadani history they've ever had so many grandfathers.
Do you hear the difference? Do you hear the different vision of what had happened? Joseph could have used his memories of his brothers to whip up his passion to do unto others as they deserved, but he chose, with God's grace, he chose to remember that for all their faults they were his family, and he had not seen them or his father for some 22 years. For all their faults, he missed them and was homesick. So he chose, with God's grace, he chose compassion. Compassion. Passion together. According to Karen Armstrong, compassion is at the heart of every religion in the world. When asked to stand on one foot and recite the whole of the Torah, a rabbi said, "Don't do to others what you wouldn't want done unto you." That is the heart of the Torah. The rest is commentary. Compassion. It is not sappy or romantic or unrealistic. It is stopping in the midst of raging passion to take several deep breaths, count to 10, and, here is the active ingredient, putting yourself in the other's shoes. Passion ramps up the deeply held notion that I am right, and therefore that other person must be wrong, because if she's right, then I would be wrong, and I don't want to be wrong because I'm right. Right? Compassion is listening carefully to someone who is wrong and trying to understand what they are saying, even if you will never be able to agree with them. Compassion is the realization I had one day in the gridlock of Denver traffic that whatever I was saying about the driver of the car in front of me, the person behind me was saying the same thing about me. Compassion is the spiritual knowledge that what goes around comes around, and hatefulness of others generates hatred toward me. Joseph explains he cannot blame his brothers for what they did to him, for it is by their action that God was able to put Joseph right where he needed to be to help his family through the famine. There's another word for this compassion: forgiveness. Now, our egos don't like the idea of forgiveness. How can forgiveness make up for all the wrongs done unto me in the past? It can't. Why should the wrongdoer get off scot-free when I suffered so much? It doesn't matter, because it is my experience that I am the one who suffers for my unrequited hatred. Forgiveness is a very self-serving act, for after losing control and having compassion and forgiveness, I am the one who gets off scot-free. Joseph has his family again. Joseph sees his father again. Joseph can benefit himself and his clan in ways that get-even passion never could. It is fitting that this story is the end of the Genesis saga of the patriarchs. The children of Israel have a place to settle, have plenty of food, and for the first time since Abraham left his family and set out to the land God would show him, his offspring, his budding nation, is at peace. They will live in the land of Goshen happily ever after, at least for a couple hundred years. Thanks be to God.
Freedom out of control. We confuse the freedom God gives us with the ability to control our lives. When we remember it's God who gives us this freedom. And God who loves us so much that he gave his Son to accept the brunt of all the passions of those who were running the world at the time. Just like the father in the end of the spear story. They did not take Christ's life. Judas did not betray Christ. Jesus gave his life for you and for your freedom, that you may know Christ in the center of yourself and surrounding you in love and making it possible to have freedom that's out of control. Again, thanks be to God.